everyone, welcome back to another episode of How to Save the Planet, the first one of 2020. I'm Muna, here with you again, your climate campaigner, here to wade through many issues that could be affecting you and I. And I'm super excited to be joined by another brilliant co-host, Isobel. Introduce yourself.
Hiya, I'm Isobel. I work in the content and creative team working on video content.
Nice. So, the new year and January can be rough. I actually found out an interesting fact that Monday, 20th of January is the most depressing day of the year. So you might be listening to this on the most depressing day of the year. I don't know how that makes you feel, but I can relate.
Yeah, definitely. January can be tough every year, but this year it has been a bit of a shock with all of the news around the world, just straight away from right early January of the fires in Australia, floods in Jakarta, everything seems a bit shook up at the moment.
So I've got some friends who have lived in London but have moved to Australia, and just seeing their Instagram, just driving from one part of Australia to another, and just seeing yellow skies and this almost surreal dystopia they're living in, where like families have to go out to a lake to avoid fires. It feels both like it feels really surreal and really personal. Sometimes we talk about this, like we've got a podcast, we talk about the climate, but then to see like half a billion animals have been like affected in Australia, that to me is wild.
Yeah, no, it's really scary, and like I think you sit here and sort of see it, but you don't know what to do, and it can just feel like you're a bit lost of knowing what to do and how to change things, really.
Yeah, which is why I think eco-anxiety is the perfect word to describe what I'm feeling, because I feel anxious, I feel worry, even for my own future. I mean, I'm 26, and the worry of being like, oh my God, like in 20 years time, what would the world I live in look like? So I'm really glad that for this episode, we're focused on eco-anxiety, because I think it's just so relevant. So how does eco-anxiety make you feel? Do you relate to that in any way?
Yeah, definitely. And I've only been working for Friends of the Earth for the last 3 months. And before that, it was sort of the crazy hot summer we had when we like in London, sort of reaching temperatures that you'd never like imagined before, and I was feeling very anxious about that. But then since joining Friends of the Earth and being more sort of, I guess, deeper into the movement, I have found like being here and talking to people and working towards it definitely helps.
Nice. And it's good to remember you are not alone, and we are not alone today. We're talking to two great people who can give us very different perspectives on eco-anxiety. So one of them being Emma Beddington, who recently published a piece covering the A to Z. Oh my God, am I American? I'm not American. Covering A to Z of tackling eco-anxiety. And then we have Caroline Hickman, who is a psychotherapist specializing in climate psychology. And that's the first time I've ever heard of climate psychology. It's a new phrase to me. Let's kick off with our chat with Emma first. Hi Emma, welcome. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us. I think Isobel and I are super excited to hear about your article and your journey with eco-anxiety. But before we begin, could you give us just a quick intro into who you are?
So I'm Emma Beddington. I'm a freelance journalist. I work mainly for The Guardian and The Observer. I also work for Sunday Times sometimes. I'm a mother of 2 and I live in lovely York.
Nice. Okay, so let's talk eco-anxiety. So do you have any recollections of a ping moment, the moment when it hit you and you thought, oh, this is something I need to deal with?
So I think there was always been like an underlying feeling. I mean, you can't not have some kind of sense of it, I think. And I had this sort of low churn of anxiety about the climate, about the environment for probably decades. But I did an interview this summer with Professor Hugh Montgomery, he's a researcher on sort of human biology. He's not a climate change specialist, but he is part of the NHS's group on climate change. And just as a sort of aside in an interview on a completely different subject, I was like, oh, you're involved in sort of climate issues, aren't you? And he ended up going on a sort of really detailed and interesting talk about what he thought, how bad he thought things were, basically. And he was saying he had 2 children who were sort of in their mid-teens, and he thought, and it was just graven on my memory, he said he thought it was highly unlikely they'd live past late middle age because of climate issues. And to hear it in such stark terms from a man who's a scientist, who is, empirically minded, who's not particularly given to drama, was really shocking to me. And I think I came away from that meeting thinking, well, things are even worse than I thought. And he also said, and I don't know anyone else who's working in this field who thinks differently.
That is really scary.
Which is terrifying.
Yeah, that naturally going to give you anxiety around it. Is that what inspired you to write your article about the eco-anxiety?
Well, I think what happened was I discussed it with my editor when I came back, because I was just reeling, actually. It was just, of that whole interview, he was talking about a book he'd written. It was a completely different topic, but that was what stayed with me. And that was where the idea for the article came from.
Yeah, and I think we can all relate to moments when it kind of kick-starts the spiral of eco-anxiety. So my own moment was I was with these Australian campaigners, and they were just talking in such kind of harsh terms of, don't even build any more playgrounds, we need to just get acting on the climate crisis, which I was like, whoa, hold on a minute. Children can't have playgrounds? What is happening here? And I don't know if you have a similar moment, Isobel.
Well, I think like what you're saying with the hot weather in the summer, I think that's when it does really hit home. You can actually start imagining what it would be like.
It's definitely food for thought. Okay, so you've gone to your editor, you're like, I'm going to write this A to Z. Through that process, was there anything you learned, and kind of did it teach you anything?
So firstly, I'd say never in my life would I volunteer to do an A to Z. It is the devil's work. You never want to do an A to Z list of anything as a journalist, because there are always going to be those letters that you're just nightmarish. Anyway, I thought the topic was really interesting. I was definitely up for doing it. I found it was probably one of the hardest things I've written, because of having to confront some of the realities that maybe I had been avoiding. So it was very difficult, and I was quite anxious while I was writing it. But there were quite a few things that I found that were helpful. I think there are two ways. The two ways that you can deal with eco-anxiety in a way are linked. You can do something that helps, and you can do something that makes you feel better. And often those two are in fact the same, but they're sort of interconnected. But the things that personally helped me deal with the way I was feeling, I think, were I talked to a couple of nature writers. And I don't have a garden, but I have got a little tiny outside concretey space. And both of them were suggesting ways where I could sort of bring more wildlife into my tiny square of concrete, basically. And it gave me a really positive sense of something. I was doing something that was actually making me feel a lot better, and also in some ridiculously tiny, pathetic way, but it was kind of helping local wildlife, and those were very nice. That was so. Emma Mitchell, she's written a really, really nice book which is about how wildlife is good for depression. Another big theme that came out from the people I talked to was group action. Yeah. Group action, and in fact not just action, but in fact just being in a group, and that it's not an individual pathology or problem, being anxious about the climate. It's a collective thing. It's something that we're all in and involved in.
Yeah, it'd be weird not to be worried.
Sure, exactly. But it can feel quite isolating, I think. And certainly I talked to I talked to Jake Woody, who's one of the people who's involved in the sort of youth climate strikes.
Yes.
And he described it as potentially being quite an isolating feeling, being anxious and perhaps not being surrounded by other people who are experiencing the same anxiety or who aren't expressing it. Yeah. And those sort of group actions are very comforting in that way, because the way you feel is being